everybody. This week we're talking about fungus. Now some of you may be like, Marin, I already know a lot about fungus. I do not like mushrooms on my pizza, and that's all I need to know. Well, funguses are actually really, really cool and really important in our environment. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail about funguses. When we look at a fungus, what you see of a fungus is the fruiting body. That's the part that you eat. If you eat mushrooms, for example, that's the fruiting body. The fruiting body can look very different in a lot of different ways, which is why I have all these various drawings of funguses, because we're going to talk about the different shapes that it can look like. Funguses also have almost like roots, but they aren't roots. They're called hyphae. And these are really important too because one, they hold the mushroom in place, and two, they help kind of transfer different molecules back and forth. So these are important, but they are not roots. They're not the same thing as plants' roots. And that is because plants are producers. They use photosynthesis to take light and turn it into sugar. Whereas funguses are decomposers. It means that they take things that are, they take dead things, essentially, or any other parts of fruits, animals, all kinds of things. They'll take those and they use that for energy instead. So they kind of eat things. They break it down. It's not quite the same like how we eat with our mouths, but they use their hyphae and their fruiting bodies. Kind of cool. So funguses may look like plants, but they're very, very different from plants. And again, what we see is the fruiting body, but something that is the same between all these funguses is that they have spores. That's what all these little dots here on all of these pictures, those are spores. Now, funguses reproduce asexually. That means that there is not two different funguses that come together and they have cells that combine and make a gamete, which would be sexual reproduction. Instead, they create copies of their own cells, release them into the world, and they make clones of this same fungus. Okay? So that's how funguses reproduce using spores. There's a lot of different kinds of funguses I've drawn on here. Some of them look like little shelves on trees. You can find some like chicken of the woods. Those ones look like little shelves up the side of a tree. Some of them look like slime. So I have a little slime here. And both of these still have hyphae. And most of the time you can't see the hyphae. They're very, very small. So they both have hyphae that hold them to the tree, and they both produce using spores still. They're also ones, sometimes they are huge. You can find puffball mushrooms that are like the size of a soccer ball. And these guys, again, produce using spores. They shoot spores out of a little hole in the top. These ones are edible, so you can eat some mushrooms. Some mushrooms are very, very poisonous. Some mushrooms are hallucinogenic. So fungi are very, very unique in lots of ways. I talked about one that is very large, like the puffball. We also have ones that are very, very small. We have even single-celled funguses. Now this is really cool because when we look at other kingdoms, like the animal kingdom or the plant kingdom, they're usually one or the other. They're either multi-celled or single-celled, right? We don't have any single-celled animals. But we do have single-celled organisms like bacteria, and they are in their own kingdom. But with fungus, we have both large multicellular ones and very small singular cell ones like yeast. So even if you're like, Marin, this is all very interesting and everything, but once again, I do not like mushrooms, so I don't want to eat them. Well, if you like anything that has to rise, like bread, if you like bread that rises and is fluffy on the inside, then you like fungus because it helps bread to rise. We use yeast. You might even have some in your kitchen right now. And that's not like something that's hiding in the back of your fridge growing mold kind of thing. This is a very useful type of fungus. I have one more drawn on here because this one here is like a coral shaped one. So some of them will look like toadstools, kind of what you expect from a mushroom, and some of them will look very different. Among the toadstool shaped ones, the ones that we think of when you immediately say fungus, you think of mushroom, right? We have two different kinds. We have ones, there's lots of different species, but there's two different ways to tell between the species. There's some that have gills underneath, so you can see these little like lines there. Those are the gills, okay, and those produce spores, and remember that's how they reproduce. So these, they have little flaps that produce spores, or some of them have little tubes that produce spores. So you can see these little tiny tubes in there. They produce the spores and release them. Now, if you've ever wondered, like, man, I'm finding mushrooms or fungus, I find mold in my fridge all the time. Where does it come from even? It comes from little teeny tiny spores in the air. So it might seem like these just come out of nowhere and that they appear without any reason, but it's just because all the time there are mushroom spores in the air. Or funguses in the air that spread asexually, like we said. So they use wind, they use water to go to different places and to spread around. So after it rains, it's a really good time to go look for mushrooms and other funguses.
Hello everyone, we just finished our lesson with Marin. We've got quite a few possible activities that you can do this week to remember what we learned about mushrooms and fungus, okay? So, number one, you can go to the grocery store and try a new mushroom. And when you bring it home, depending on what it is they have, for example, shiitake mushrooms might be in a can. There's a lot of different kinds. You can cut them open, dissect them. Maybe you'll see what spores are there. You can see what that stem looks like and do some compare and contrast as to what mushrooms you see. That's an option. You also can go out. It's been raining a lot. Spring is on the horizon, and see if there are any new mushrooms maybe in the corners of your backyard or in some shade. They love a little bit of shade, not too much sun, and so you can look in some of those areas. If you do that though, we're not going to touch the mushrooms, smell the mushrooms, taste those mushrooms, because there is a good possibility that they could be poisonous. So take a picture or sit down with your food journal and just draw, take notes, see what they look like, and then later you can try and go on the internet and see if you can identify them. Even if you feel pretty confident about your identification though, I would still not risk it and eat it, but it is still a good practice to go try and use our taxonomy skills and see if you can identify what you find. So that is all for this week. We'll see you guys next week.